So to introduce our main program with Phyllis Campbell and also our moderator, Coach Kelly Holm, is Michelle Matthew. So just a little bit about Michelle. When she's not overseeing about $1 billion in assets for nonprofits, she enjoys fast cars. In fact, she raced her car at Pacific Raceways in Kent, is going to the Formula One race in Montreal in June. Another fun fact about Michelle, her sister and her sister's husband are missionaries in Niger, Africa. So please help me welcome Michelle to the podium.
Persistence. That is how Phyllis Campbell got started in her banking career. She started out actually working in her family's dry cleaning business in Spokane, Washington. Thanks to a scholarship, she was able to attend Washington State University. After graduating from WSU, she wanted to get a management training program at Spokane-based Old National Bank. When she applied to the program, she was told that the bank was not hiring women. Now, this was in the early mid-'70s, and the aftermath of the ERA movement, and Phyllis was undeterred. She called up that bank every single day for 35 days. And you know what? They gave her the job. They finally hired her. She worked hard. She learned every job there was there. She was open to coaching from her mentors, and she was open to opportunity. Phyllis earned her MBA from the UW Foster School of Business Executive MBA program while she was working full-time in Spokane. Think about that. And she went on to become the first female CEO of a Washington State bank in 1993, the same year, that was the same year that I started my career in finance. Phyllis, you've been a role model and an inspiration for me ever since. Today, Phyllis Campbell is the chairwoman, Pacific Northwest, for JPMorgan Chase. She's the bank's most senior executive in the Northwest across all business lines. She is also past president and CEO of the Seattle Foundation. Under her leadership there, the foundation doubled its charitable assets. Prior to that, she was president and CEO of U.S. Bank of Washington for over 6 years. And guess what? The bank doubled in assets under her tenure there as well. Phyllis has a proven track record of board governance as well. In the for-profit sector, she is an independent director for Alaska Air Group and serves as a chair of the governance committee. She also serves on the diversity advisory board of Toyota Motor Corp, and she served on the Nordstrom board of directors for more than 10 years. In the not-for-profit sector, she is the chair of the U.S.-Japan Council, as well as member of the Global Advisory Board for Women Corporate Directors. She is a former director of PATH. She is a member of the National Association of Corporate Directors Governance Advisory Council, and she's spoken on governance at a number of conferences. In addition to the Executive MBA from University of Washington and the business degree from WSU, she is a graduate of the Pacific Coast Banking School at the University of Washington and the Executive Management Program at Stanford University. She holds honorary doctorates from Whitworth and Gonzaga. Another Zag. If you're counting, by the way, that's 5 university degrees. Phyllis has also earned dozens of awards for her business leadership and civic engagement over the years, but for Phyllis, the best sign of her success is a stronger community. She says her grandfather taught her a valuable lesson. Life is not about you. It is about being an instrument for greater things. Please welcome Phyllis Campbell.
Well, thank you so much. And Michelle, thank you for that absolutely amazing introduction. And really, this is great to be back. I said to some of you coming in, this is one of my favorite civic organizations in the city. There's like double energy here, and it just really makes my day to be with the Seattle 4 Rotary. So President Cindy, thank you so much for the invitation. We talked about this a while ago. But I really want to say thank you to the Rotarians, to Seattle 4 Rotary, to all of you for all you do to make this a better community and a better world. I really deeply appreciate everything you do. And so my brief talk today is our community's world-class journey. And I'm going to offer first maybe just a high-level overview and a personal perspective on where we've been in my 30 years here. And I think a couple of thoughts about what are our challenges? What are our remaining challenges in front of us? And last but not least, engage in a conversation with Kelly Holm, who's been introduced, and all of you on what we can do on our community's journey. So back to the introduction, my personal story was I did arrive here, Michelle, 30 years ago. We've got the Spokane Zag thing going here today from Spokane. And Marycliff, there you go, Marycliff High School. So when my bank offered me the promotion and transfer here, I was thrilled. You know, and I said, my gosh, I've finally a chance to come to the big city. And at that time, if you recall, the biggest employers here, Boeing and Microsoft, I mean, obviously fantastic employers doing so much. And I was really heartened by a number of things. It was, first of all, as per this Rotary Club, the great civic and philanthropic spirit was alive and well here. It still is today. And I really found that I was heartened by the fact that even someone like me who was new to the community could make a difference here. So it really was quite a positive welcoming. But I have to tell you, the one shock to me was I walked into rooms, not this room, but many rooms, boardrooms, some of the civic organizations that were the mainstays, and I saw very few people that looked like me. Very few women on boards, very few people of color. And I think, you know, I know this Rotary Club actually, I think, was one of the first major civic clubs to welcome, I believe, Judy Runstad and then Ann Farrell, formerly of the Seattle Foundation, as presidents. So, I mean, this club has certainly demonstrated a real diverse, I think, agenda here. So let's fast forward to 30 years later. Where are we? Where are we as a community? And we have a slide up there about our great community. Well, there's no question that we're on the global stage, bigger and better than ever. We're recognized as a powerhouse of innovative concepts, of companies, and certainly of philanthropy. And when I travel globally, and I say I'm from Seattle, Washington, you know, they no longer say, oh yes, Washington, D.C. We've all had that. But they still smile and say, which is true when I was in China last, oh, is that where Sleepless in Seattle happened? So some things never change. Everybody remembers that. But so many world rankings put us at the top for quality of life. No question. Numbers of higher education degrees, our connectedness, our innovation. I mean, we get so many high rankings. And I think some of you said, I heard at some of the tables when we said what makes a world-class community, there's no question we still have a deficit in some areas. Infrastructure, K through 12 education, and other areas that we all recognize and you all talked about. But I think one of the things that I pointed out, Kelly shared a study with me that I think one of the Rotarians had from community attributes. And it listed 10 top qualities of world-class cities. And as I looked at the list, I said, you know what? We're pretty good on about 7 of those. In fact, my guess is we're top quartile. So that's pretty good if we think about a world-class city. But the one that I pointed out and that I looked at was what was called basically being a welcome and inclusive community. And I have to say, I don't know that I'd put us in the top quartile there, and let me tell you why. Well, I think the deficits of diverse talent and lack of economic inclusion are going to be our Achilles heels. They are and they will be in the future. And why does this matter? Well, first of all, world-class communities are inclusionary, welcoming communities. I mean, I think we all agree with that. And I think we have great diverse talent here. Again, this room is a fantastic example, and President Cindy and so many others here. But I really have to say, if I still look at the top echelons of business especially, I don't see the visual diversity. And by the way, John, sitting in the front there, diversity includes all of us, including I think what you said were insecure males and females. We need all of us at the table. So, you know, it really is about all of us sitting at the table. But I'm specifically talking, when I look at the top echelons, I'm still disappointed. So the other reason that I think I would tee up for you is world-class communities, I think, have a way of embracing diversity of thought. which really is about, it was visual diversity that Steve Sunborg so well teed up in his inspirational remarks. It leads to innovative ideas. And so I was recently in Melbourne just over Thanksgiving of last year, and one of the things I noticed for those of you that have been to Melbourne is it is a dynamic city. It's humming, there's lots of economic activity, and it's not perfect by any means, but what I saw was a visual diversity, visually a diverse group of talented leaders, business, civic, education, political. And really, as a result, Melbourne is, I think, going to be one of the cities of the future. And by the way, it's one of our benchmark global cities that we in Seattle benchmark ourselves against. So I could go on, but I think the important thing is to focus right now on where we are as a community and then talk about what we can do or what we can do in our lives to advance this diversity and inclusion that we, I think, need to do in Seattle. So I would just say in my position at JPMorgan Chase, I'm very, very lucky to get to interact with many of you, with Cindy and so many other people, in really talking about things that impact our community. And what I find is many people come to me and say, you know, I just want to meet with you because I want to meet with somebody that looks like me, somebody that, you know, I can get some advice from. And I think a couple of themes that I wanted to mention to you, because these are folks that are relatively new to the community that I still hear, and I just want maybe all of us to think a little bit about this, is the following. Quote, "It's difficult to break into this community as someone from the outside, unless it's around your kids, you know, kids' school stuff." Another quote, "I've been here 10 years, and outside of work, I still run into the, quote, Seattle freeze, and I'm not sure I want to stay," and so we can talk about that too. But the thing I hear most commonly is, you know, when I walk into rooms, the same thing I saw 30 years ago, you know, where are the women in greater numbers in positions of power, likewise people of color? So I think it is something for us to think about. And I work a lot on trying to get more gender diversity on corporate boards. I think, as Michelle mentioned, I have an opportunity to do that. But even with all the efforts in Seattle, we're still no better than the national average. Only 1 out of every 5 seats is occupied by women today, in spite of the fact that we think of ourselves as progressive. And then if you look at people of color, only 1 out of 20 is a diverse person on the publicly traded company boards. So those are a couple of stats to think about, but I think the thing I really wanted to leave you with today is the bigger challenge of inclusion. And I think if we think about a world-class community, you know, we want to look at our own ability to say, are we looking at economic inclusion? Because that's just as important as the things I just talked about. So I just picked up a report last week, hot off the press, from Brookings, the Brookings Institution, called the Brookings Metro Monitor. And it shows, unfortunately, that the Seattle region is not only getting worse in the disparity gap as it pertains to racial and economic groups, we're among the bottom 20 metros in economic inclusion. So I really want to just have you sit with that for a moment, because I think it is something that we all need to take seriously if we think about our future as success for all. And what I would say to you is that we have a great history in this region. We have the civic spirit, we have the can-do culture of innovation, of being able to think in an agile and really outside-the-box manner. So if we collectively lean into this one, all of us in this room, thinking outside the box and what we can do differently to embrace diversity and inclusion, I think we can get after this, I really do. So Amy Liu in her report said, and I quote, she's from Brookings, "These challenges require new solutions that create a more advanced economy that works for all." So let me wrap up with, and I think it's a slide up there that's the final slide, with an African proverb. See if we can get the slide up. But anyway, the proverb is basically this. It basically says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so thank you for listening, and I look forward to the conversation. And Kelly Holm is going to join me on the stage to tee up a few questions up here, and then we really want to open it up to say, what are your thoughts and ideas? And I look forward to the conversation. Kelly, come on up.
Well, thank you so much, Phyllis, and thank you, President Cindy, for inviting me, twisting my arm. No, I'm teasing. This is truly an honor. Those of you that know me know that I prefer to be in the background most of the time, but this topic I hear all the time in the work that I do as well as an executive coach. And, you know, one of the things that I so love about Phyllis's story, and something she shared with me when we first were talking about this, is that in spite of her role, all the things that she's done, there are still times when she has difficulty having her voice heard in the room. And I mean, does that surprise anybody that she also would have that challenge? And so if I can turn it to you for just a moment, Phyllis, what are some things that you do now that you're in this leadership role where you can influence? What are some things that you do to help make sure other diverse voices are heard?
Well, yeah, and is this on? Hello? Is this
There we
on?
go. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, thanks for the question. And one thing I mentioned to Kelly is I think in spite of my years of sitting in boardrooms, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, I'm always surprised that, you know, I'll say something, it will get ignored. 10 minutes later, a guy will say it, and it will be the right point, right? And so what I said to Kelly is, you know, if it's happening to me, I often think how it just happens. It's usually, in fact, mostly unintended bias, and it's not intentional. I think it's just, you know, people aren't used to seeing faces like mine or voices like mine in a room still. So what I do, to your point, is I jump back into the conversation without getting emotional or defensive and just say, you know, Steve made that great point. I'd like to amplify it just to get back in. But I also, what I said to you, and it's something we can all do, is be aware of the voices that aren't getting heard or the quiet voice. And I'll say, you know, Michelle just made a great point about 5 minutes ago. I'm not sure we heard that. Michelle, would you say that again? So I think it's something that, it's little things that we can do, but it's something I think that is effective in helping that unintended bias that sometimes happens.
And this is another, thank you, Phyllis, and this is another thing that was remarkable in my conversation with Phyllis, is she says, I want to do something a little different in this session. I actually want to give all of you a voice in the room. And so rather than a Q&A between this room and Phyllis just yet, we're actually going to ask you some questions and have a few of you chime in on some of these topics while Phyllis listens. And then we'll bring it back to her to summarize some of the key things that she heard. And so it's kind of a notion of the genius in the room. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of appreciative inquiry, but it's the notion of when you're trying to solve a hard problem, look for glimmers of hope, of where actually things are starting to really work, and figure out what's working and how do we build on that. So that's what we're going to be asking you, is some questions about what are you experiencing that's helping, what are things your organizations are doing that's helping. But first of all, I want to return to the Seattle freeze comment that Phyllis made. So just by show of hands, how many people know what that is? Oh my goodness. Okay. And I know we have some mic handlers. I think Kathy, there you go. So Laurel and Kathy. So what we're going to do is we're going to have them circling around and just ask that you raise your hand. And again, we want to hear from some diverse voices in the room, some people we might not always hear from. And the first question I want to ask, can somebody define what Seattle freeze is? Who can describe it?
Faith Ireland's going to take a shot.
Yes, I'd like to say that the Seattle freeze is where people seem friendly, but it's kind of artificial. They don't invite you into their homes and so on. But I would like to say that the Seattle freeze is very much a product of two things. Number one, lack of community in our neighborhoods and transferring that to the workplace. And number two, people who weren't born and raised in Seattle.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So this is something that we in this room, there's all these leaders in this room, we have the opportunity to do something different with this. You know, how do we thaw that freeze? So one of the questions I want to put out there is, when you think about your organizations, or even the seat you sit in, how do you encourage diverse talent to stay? So the Seattle Freeze, people will say, you know, I'm not sure I want to stay, or my spouse isn't finding friends. What are some things you're experiencing and or your organizations are doing to encourage our diverse talent to stay in Seattle? So what are some examples of that? Over here?
Well, I'm going to talk about some of the diversity that we do in our company, and I guess it sort of flies in the face of what you've been saying, because that's been one of the bases of our Benbridge way of operating. A lot of it has to do with making those community connections and being involved in a lot of diverse groups within the community, whether it is something like the Urban League, whether it is the Centro de la Raza, whether it is just going to schools in our public school system that are diverse, where you end up meeting other people. And I guess that was something that was the basis of our organization, is that you go and you seek people out. You just don't sit there. And this is maybe some of the Seattle Freeze. We live in our little silos, and we're very nice, and we smile and everything, but we don't get out. We don't get out into the community. We don't get out to talk to our neighbors. We don't meet them, and we don't really interact with them. And once you end up doing that, and once you are part of the community, you make that emphasis to try and include others. It makes for really a fun type of existence, to find people that are a little bit different than you, and to bring them into your family.
Yeah.
Well, John, I really want to give a number of companies in this room and others credit, because you're a shining example of how to get past that. And I think one of the things that I would say is, get involved civically here, but get involved with organizations that may be not the usual suspects. You encourage your employees to get involved with the most underserved schools. And I know I have a group of former Seattle Foundation colleagues here, and I'll just confess that till I had the privilege of working for the Seattle Foundation, I really hadn't had a chance to get, really exposure to some of the most underserved parts of our community, not because I didn't want to. So I think your point is, you have to make it happen to really understand.
Yeah, great example.
Can we get some more input here?
Yes, absolutely.
Kayla Hall.
Thank you. So you said about the seat that we're sitting in currently. So I wear two different hats. I have a business, but then I also have a nonprofit. Normally, we like to put on big, elaborate conferences. We want like the who's who in the room. But in 2019, we decided to go where people are. So we went to a prison, Echo Glen Prison, sat down, met with the girls, spent 4 hours with them, brought them goodies. We also went into Evergreen High School, and we're going back there in 2 weeks and spending time with the girls, talking about things that's really happening in their life: suicide, bullying, real subjects, human sex trafficking. And I think it's really important that bigger organizations do look at smaller nonprofits, if we're not like the big ones, and look at funding, because funding is one of the biggest things that prevent us from really doing our work. And we do have a new board of directors, but all 12 of us, we're volunteering our time, and it does take a lot of time to do those things, but we have to encourage the young people, the young leaders that are coming up, to be able to eliminate things like school to prison pipeline and encourage school to workforce pipeline here in Washington State.
Wonderful examples. Yeah. You want to hear from one more, Phyllis? Yeah, let's hear from one more, and then we'll pose another question.
Okay. I would just add, as you think about diversity in all of its forms, you have to be intentional. It doesn't just happen because you have one person of color on your board. Okay, now we're diverse. I, as most of you know, ran a program called Leadership Tomorrow. When I started in that program, only about 16% of a given year's class were people of color or different in some way. We're now over 35% people of color every year. And those folks spend 9 months together, learning with and from each other, so that by the time they're done, they have relationships. They've become friends with people they would have never met otherwise. And you really have to work at that. It just doesn't just happen. It's a constant exercise that you have to have in the front of your brain at all times.
Beautiful.
Well, and the only thing I'd add to Jan, your comment is I think it's important too, once you are that diverse person in the room, to be the champion for asking for and championing other diverse folks to be included. And that's quite often my role, but then, I found that there's a number of mainstream folks who have become champions as well. So I think it's, to your point, raising the consciousness. And I'll just give you a quick example. I said Michelle mentioned the Alaska Airlines Board. We're 50% gender diverse, but that didn't happen by accident. 35% of us are people of color. And I can tell you the decisions and the discussion is so much more robust. So I think it's a little bit of how do you get there, and you have to make it conscious, as you say.
And that's a beautiful segue, and hopefully you can roll with this next question, which is, as you have leadership roles opening in your various teams, what are some things you're finding are working to attract diverse talent to your leadership roles? And I'll go back to you, Kathy. Is that a question that...
Suzanne Griffin's going to respond.
Okay.
I'm a former dean of South Seattle College, and I feel really strongly about students seeing people in leadership roles or teaching roles especially that look like them. When I took over the division I had at South, most of the teachers looked like me. I told them that I was going to bring in extra money because I used to work for the state of Washington. I knew where it was. And I said, you will not lose your jobs, but when I get done here, I want every student coming in, and I worked in an area that was very diverse, to have a role model of success, and I did it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Wonderful example.
That's great.
So what are some other creative ways that you're either putting things in place to attract diverse leaders to your teams and or retaining diverse leaders on your leadership teams? What are some other positive examples of this? Yes.
So I'll speak about the Rotary Club of Seattle because I chair the governance committee this year, and we run the elections, and we seek individuals who are willing to serve for both our foundation and also the club board. And we are looking for continually, because this is a population of leaders, but it's also a volunteer organization. And so we're looking for people that are willing to spend a little time to share their abilities. And we have had a concern in recent years that because we seek at least 2 candidates for each board position that's open, that some of the people might get discouraged if they don't get selected. But this year we've had the opportunity to fill 3 vacancies during the year with people who ran but were not elected. Therefore, they had been vetted. They have familiarity with the club systems and things like that. So we're seeking people that want to serve, and then when there is an opening, harness their abilities. Thank you for all of you that are willing to serve.
Thank you.
Just one practice that I thought I'll mention in answer to your question is there's something that started in athletics called the Rooney Rule. I don't know if anybody here has heard of it, but basically, to sum it up, it's that when you find an opening in your company, just ask the simple question: Are you filling? Do you have a diverse slate? At least 1 or 2 women that you're interviewing, at least 1 or 2 people of color. Means you're going to select the best person, but I think quite often human nature is we select people that look like us, whether it's for our board, whether it's for an opening in our company. So I think just by, as leaders, asking the simple question, what does our slate look like? And I think that's all we can ask. We still want best person, but I think just asking the question about the actual slate of candidates is a good practice.
Yeah.
One more comment from Michael Breeze.
Oh, yeah, I can't hold the mic. That's one thing you do, is give up the mic. How many of you, like me, are not natives of Seattle? So we talk about the Seattle freeze. My challenge is don't become part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, look at how the majority of us raised our hands.
Yeah.
So let's not be a part of that freeze. The second thing is that, and I've been a director, a leader, well, subjective, for 25 plus years. And throughout that career, you've got to be willing as the leader to step back and let others lead. Even you can't take it as part of who you are. You've got to let other people and support other people. That's really our role, is to create the next generation of success. And the only way we do that is by stepping back, not being worried about not being perceived as the leader.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, on that note, I'm going to step back and let Phyllis summarize a couple of things, and she might have a challenge for us as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you. First of all, just a round of applause for Kelly. Thank you, Kelly. So just as I know we have to wrap, but I just want to say thank you for the last comment about the Seattle freeze, because I think that would be my one takeaway. Kelly asked me, you know, what would be one thing that you would hope to get out of this today? And I said, if there's one thing, it's that we all go away with a personal challenge to say, is there something as a leader that we can do differently, whether it's to get over the Seattle freeze, not to be part of it. But I think, is there something different in our personal lives or our business lives that we can do different as a practice to be more inclusive ourselves, to get out of our bubble? I think John used that word, or Jan. And so I think part of it is just to go back, and if there's just one thing starting today or tomorrow that you will do differently, I think we can make a tremendous difference. So again, thank you very much. Rotarians, you're fantastic. I appreciate it.